I know there's a lot of interest, and rightly so, in the attacks, that attack that our troops faced over the weekend in Jordan, an attack that claimed 3 of their lives and sent more than 30 of them to the hospital, some with serious injuries. So I just want to make a few points right at the top. First, the President and the First Lady, as well as everyone in the administration, send their condolences to the family of those who were killed. No Blue Star family ever wants to become a Gold Star family. And sadly, there are now 3 more families on that roster. It's hard to imagine the grief that they're feeling right now and that they will feel for the rest of their lives. We want them to know that we'll make sure that they get all the support that they need and that we mourn with them. We also wish a complete recovery for all those wounded in this attack. They are receiving and will continue to receive the very best medical care that the military can provide them. Second, these troops were conducting a vital mission in the region aimed at helping us work with partners to counter ISIS. And even as the Defense Department gathers more information about the attack, that mission must and will continue. Third, the counter-ISIS mission is separate and distinct. Indeed, it has been long-standing and unrelated to our efforts to support Israel and to prevent a wider conflict in the region. We do not seek another war. We do not seek to escalate. But we will absolutely do what is required to protect ourselves, to continue that mission, and to respond appropriately to these attacks. Now, I know the first set of questions I'm going to get are, well, what does that look like? What's appropriate? And what response options is the President considering? I hope you can understand why I'm not going to telegraph any punches here from the podium, nor will I get in front of the President or his decision-making. He's met twice with his national security team yesterday and today. He's weighing the options before him. As he said yesterday, we will respond. We'll do that on our schedule, in our time, and we'll do it in the manner of the President's choosing as Commander-in-Chief. We'll also do it fully cognizant of the fact that these groups, backed by Tehran, have just taken the lives of American troops. And I think I'll leave it there. Now, quickly, just on one other topic. Over the weekend, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan held more than 12 hours of meetings in Bangkok with his counterpart from the People's Republic of China, Director Wang Yi. Mr. Sullivan and Director Wang took stock of progress on key issues following the meeting between President Biden and President Xi back in November. Now, that includes discussing efforts to resume military-to-military communication, which has occurred, addressing artificial intelligence, safety and risks, and advancing bilateral counter-narcotics cooperation. In fact, the launch of a working group on counter-narcotics will begin tomorrow in Beijing. Our delegation will be led by Deputy Homeland Security Advisor Jen Doskell. The two sides also held constructive discussions on global and regional issues, including those related to Russia's war against Ukraine, the Middle East, of course, the DPRK, the South China Sea, and Burma. And they also discussed cross-strait issues. And with that, I'll take some questions.
Thanks, John. A couple of just basic fact pattern questions. Can you confirm that the initial reports suggest that the attack drone that killed the U.S. forces was misidentified for a U.S. drone that was returning to that base?
I cannot.
Can you update us on has the U.S. definitively confirmed attribution of the attack beyond just vaguely Iran-backed militias? Do you have a specific militia group that you know launched this attack?
We're still working our way through that right now.
You said that the President was still weighing his options. Does that imply that the President right now has not made the decision how he wants to respond?
I won't get ahead of the President's decision-making. As I said, he met twice with the National Security Team, including not very long ago. When we have something to speak to, we'll speak to it.
And speaking to it, will we hear directly from the President? Will he speak to the American people about this attack and his response when it happens?
Well, he mentioned it yesterday in South Carolina. I don't have anything on his schedule to speak to, but I have no doubt that he'll continue to communicate with the American people about how important it is that these missions continue and that our troops and our facilities are safe.
And last one for me, has the President directed any change to force posture in the region to protect American troops there?
We don't talk about force posture changes one way or another, and we certainly don't pre-announce them, particularly when it comes to areas on the ground that are potentially under threat. I can just tell you that the President's confident that the Defense Department under Secretary Austin will do what they got to do to look after force protection issues.
John, do you expect the President would go to Dover for the dignified transfer when these Americans are returned to the United States?
I don't have anything on his schedule to speak to.
Given the fact that while there are Americans in harm's way frequently, it has been a while since we have had this kind of an incident resulting in deaths. Do you think that is a consideration of the public type of response? There are a range of responses the president could use. They go from, military strikes to sometimes it's cyber, sometimes it's things the public cannot see. Do you believe this event rises to a level where whatever the president's decision is would have a public, we would know when?
You mean you're going to know? Well, again, without getting ahead of the president's decision making, I won't do that. And as I said in my opening statement, I'm not going to telegraph punches. We'll make these decisions on our own time. As I said, the president will choose for himself how he wants to respond. And as I said in the opening statement, we'll do it fully cognizant of the fact that now, and what just happened, American lives have been taken. And so his decisions, whatever they are, will be informed by all those circumstances. What that looks like and when that comes, I'm just not able to say right now.
Thanks, Admiral. Was this strike in Jordan fundamentally different than what American forces have been facing for months now? In other words, does the U.S. believe this was a deliberate attempt at escalation?
It's fundamentally different now because we have 3 families who just got the worst possible news. That's different. And the scope of the wounded now, more than 30 injured, some of them seriously, that's also different. And it's possible that the number of wounded could go up. As you may know, traumatic brain injury symptoms, for instance, don't present themselves right away, and that is a very serious physical injury itself. But this wasn't the first drone attack on an American facility in the region. There have been others. And the fact that this one had lethal consequences doesn't mean that the previous ones weren't intended by these Iran-backed militias to have that same effect. This time they killed Americans and they wounded a lot of them. It doesn't mean that they wouldn't have preferred that outcome in the past.
An official has told ABC News, confirming the report about how the troops there had mistakenly identified the drone as one of their own. Can you talk about how this might have gotten past the defense systems at Tower 22?
I think I'm going to let the Defense Department talk about the forensics on this. I'm sure that they are already picking it apart and trying to figure out how this happened, and it'd be inappropriate for me to get ahead of that.
And in your interviews all morning, you didn't rule out a strike inside Iran. Can you just talk a little bit about the array of options in front of the president? And, for instance, could this be in phases? Could we see a smaller scale one, then a larger scale one later? Like what's the array of options?
No, I'm not going to do that. I appreciate the question. That's why I tried to take it out of the consideration in my opening statement. I'm simply not going to talk about that right now.
Lastly, do you think this could complicate the ongoing ceasefire negotiations to release more hostages?
There's no reason that whatever our response is, there's no reason for that to have an impact on our ability to try to get these hostages released. And as I said last week, so I can say today, those discussions are ongoing. We believe they have been constructive and are moving in a good direction. Don't want to sound sanguine here. There's a lot of work left to be done. We don't have an imminent deal to speak to, but based on the discussions we've had over the weekend and in recent days, we feel it's moving in a good direction.
Thanks, great. John, how does the president balance a desire to not see escalation in the region with a decision to respond?
That's the hard part of it, isn't it, Jeff? I mean, that's what being commander-in-chief is all about, is acting in accordance with our national security interests. What's unacceptable to those interests and what has to be done to protect those interests. There's no easy answer here. And that's why the president is meeting with his national security team, weighing the options before him. He'll do that as he's done in the past in a very careful, deliberate way, so that our national security interests are best preserved.
And has the president, has the administration communicated via a third party to Iran the message that you're saying on TV about not wanting to have escalation?
I am not aware, as you and I are speaking, that there's been a private message relayed to leaders in Iran. We have done that in the past, but as you and I are speaking right now, I'm not aware of such a mechanism.
And just on the hostages, can you give us an update on the latest there and what you expect in terms of a ceasefire and
Well, again, the discussions have been pretty constructive. What we're, and I want to be careful here, because don't want to say anything that would torpedo the deal we're trying to put in place. But what we're trying to work on is another humanitarian pause of sufficient duration that will allow a large number of hostages to get released. And as you've seen in the past when we did this back in November, you got to have a pause in the fighting to get them safely out. So that's what we're aiming at. And then of course, if you get that period of time, whatever that ends up being, then you can take advantage of it to get more humanitarian assistance. And certainly when there's a pause in the fighting, that means there'll be a reduction in civilian casualties, which is also a goal of ours.
Admiral, can you confirm, is the president currently actively considering potential attacks inside Iran?
We are not looking for a war with Iran. We are not seeking a conflict with the regime in a military way. And as I said in the opening, we're not looking to escalate here. This attack over the weekend was escalatory. Make no mistake about it. And it requires a response. Make no mistake about that. I will not get ahead of the president's decision making.
So you're not saying either way whether striking inside Iran is or isn't?
We are
on the
not looking
table?
for a war with Iran, MJ. I am not going to speak to the president's decisions.
And the administration's assessment for a number of months now has been that Iran does not want a direct war with the U.S. either. Does yesterday change that assessment?
I'm not at liberty to discuss or to speculate about what the Supreme Leader wants or doesn't want. Clearly, these attacks continue, and now they've had lethal consequences. We know these groups are supported by Iran. Make no mistake about that. We know that. And this administration has taken action in the past to hold them accountable, and we've taken action over the last 3 years to hold Iran accountable for a range of destabilizing activities. Issued more than 500 sanctions, or 500 entity sanctions, just since we came into office, as well as changing our force posture in the Middle East appropriately. So we'll just, we'll continue to look at the options available to us.
Is it clear to you now whether the attack yesterday was at Iran's direct urging, or if this was more a proxy group that was mostly acting on its own?
I'm not going to talk about intelligence issues. We know that Iran supports these groups. The degree to which they order and direct is something that intelligence analysts will look at. We know they support them. We know they resource them. We know they train them. We know that they're certainly not discouraging these attacks, whether it's attacks by the Houthis, what Hamas did on the 7th of October, what Hezbollah has proven capable of doing, and now, of course, what these militia groups continue to do in places like Iraq and Syria, and now Jordan.
And just one last one on the UNRWA controversy. Israel says that they have information about 13 employees who were connected to the October 7th attack. Do you have any reason to believe that that might have been more widespread, that there could be information that later indicates that it was beyond those 13 people?
I haven't seen any information that affirmatively makes that case, that it's more than now 13. I think last week we were looking at a dozen. That's why an investigation is so dang important here, so that we can look at the scope of the problem set. But you got 13,000 UNRWA employees, the UN Relief and Works Agency. You have 13,000 of them in Gaza alone. And as I said last week, let's not impugn the good work of a whole agency because of the potential bad actions here by a small number. I am not dismissing the seriousness of the allegations against those employees. And whether there's going to be more that will be found, hopefully the investigation will give us more insight. It is important. And look, the UNRWA staff, Commissioner General, and the UN Secretary General Guterres last week made it clear they're taking this seriously. That's our expectation too. It's really important that this investigation be as thorough and as transparent and as credible as possible, and we're going to be watching real closely.
John, can I push you a little bit more on the hostages and the linkage between the potential linkage between the hostages and whatever action you guys decide to take? One of the things you guys have talked about since October 7th is how intertwined the region is, whether it's Lebanon and Hezbollah or Hamas or Iran or the Houthis, and the difficulty with not wanting to set fire and, a spark in one place that then, goes all around the region. So what gives you any confidence that if you guys are close to a deal on the hostages and then the president orders a strike, that deal doesn't fall apart as a result of outrage and anger in the region at the actions of the United States? And how does the president, make that calculation, given 6 Americans still in Gaza and the other hostages and everything else?
I didn't say we were confident, though, Mike. We're mindful of the way some actors in the region are trying to make connections across the region. What I said was, there's no reason why our work on a hostage deal needs to be affected or impacted by what happened over the weekend or what we do about what happened over the weekend, and we will respond. We still want to keep the work going, our shoulder to the wheel on this hostage deal, and we'll just have to see where it goes. I also want to repeat what I said earlier. We're not overly sanguine here. We're not cocky. We understand there's a lot of hard work ahead, and that work ahead of us diplomatically certainly might be affected by events elsewhere in the region, not just what happened in Jordan and what might come as a result of that. But there's no reason why it should, and that's why we're going to stay at that task.
Over here. Thanks, Kirby. Given these deaths, does the White House acknowledge that the previous retaliatory strikes that it has taken in the region have been ineffective at protecting American troops?
The strikes that we have taken in the past have definitely had an impact on degrading and disrupting the activities of some of these groups. Clearly, they have decided to keep conducting those attacks, and now it's had lethal consequences for American troops. And so we will weigh an additional set of options before us. The president will make his decision to respond appropriately. The attacks need to stop.
Does the president have all the legal authority he believes that he needs to respond to these attacks?
Yes.
What is the legal basis?
Article 2, Constitution, Commander-in-Chief, self-defense of our troops.
Doesn't believe he needs additional authority from Congress.
The president has the authority to take the action he needs to protect our troops and our facilities overseas under Article 2.
Thanks. The president faces a great deal of political pressure here at home, with the Republicans, for example, calling for direct strikes on Iran. Does the president feel that pressure, and how much does that pressure weigh on his decision making?
The pressure the president's feeling, if you want to call it that, is to make sure we can continue to protect and defend our national security interests in the region. First and foremost, his mind is solidly, as I put in my opening statement, on the families of those who just got the worst possible news you can, and troops that are in the hospital trying to recover. Number 2, on the vital mission sets that our troops are performing across the region, in this particular case, a counter-ISIS mission. That's the pressure he's under, to make sure that those troops get the support that they need, get the resources they need, and that the mission is able to continue, and that our national security interests in the region, which are wide and varied, are preserved and protected.
Just one other thing, if I may. You said earlier that this attack was escalatory, but the United States doesn't want a war. Do you believe that Iran wants a war?
That's up to Iran to decide, and for Iran to speak to. I can't, as I said earlier, speak for the supreme leader. I wouldn't do that. Clearly, there's a calculus by at least the IRGC that conducting these attacks is worth the risk that they're taking. And we obviously are going to keep working to change that calculus.
Thank you. So NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg is in Washington. What are you hearing from the NATO allies? Are you sharing with you any concern about the possibility of a wider war?
You're talking about the Middle East? Yeah, we're glad the Secretary General's here. I think he met with Secretary Austin this morning. I know he's meeting with Jake Sullivan today. Lots on the agenda. I won't speak for our allies or the Secretary General. I think it's safe to say that many of our European allies certainly share our concerns about what's going on in the Middle East. I mean, my goodness, many of them are participants, willing participants in our coalition in the Red Sea to protect shipping there. So clearly they have concerns about that, and I have no doubt that Secretary General will raise those issues with Jake and did raise it with Secretary Austin.